Ethan Cole had spent years mastering silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that follows battlefield chaos and personal loss. So when he drove into the Arizona White Mountain region for a quiet weekend before his blind date, silence felt like a blessing he desperately needed. The tall pines, dusted with fresh snow, surrounded him like a protective wall. But even among that beauty, he couldn't shake the heaviness inside him. Being a single father wasn't easy, and being a retired U.S. Army veteran made the loneliness sharper. He wasn't expecting anything unusual, just rest, reflection, and fresh air. He stepped outside that first morning, the cold biting at his skin, and something unusual caught his eye: tiny footprints in the untouched snow. They were too small to belong to a hunter or hiker. Instinct from years of military training sharpened his focus instantly. Ethan followed the trail cautiously, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. As he approached a fallen log near a frozen creek, he saw movement, slight, trembling. There, curled up and barely conscious, was a young Apache boy. His cheeks were sunken, lips cracked, and clothes soaked with melting snow. Ethan knelt beside him, heart pounding. The child looked up slowly, fear and exhaustion clouding his dark eyes. He tried to speak, but only one word escaped his chapped lips: help. That whisper cut straight through Ethan's chest. Without hesitation, he wrapped his military jacket around the boy's freezing body. The child weighed almost nothing, as though surviving on willpower alone. Ethan lifted him gently and carried him back toward the cabin, feeling the boy's trembling grow weaker with every step. Snowflakes swirled around them as if the storm itself held its breath. By the time they reached the cabin, wind had picked up, and heavy snow began falling again. Ethan placed the boy near the fireplace, rubbing his cold hands and checking for injuries. The child was starving, bones visible beneath his thin clothing, and his skin felt like ice. Ethan warmed soup, offered water, and spoke softly even though he knew the boy might not understand English. The child ate slowly, hesitantly, as though unsure he was truly safe. Ethan recognized that look. He had seen it in war zones, in children who had survived more than they could speak about. That night, the storm worsened, trapping them in the cabin as temperatures dropped dangerously low. Over the next 4 days, Ethan took care of the boy as if he were his own. He cooked warm meals, covered him with blankets, and built the fire higher every few hours. In moments of calm, Ethan told small stories from his army years, not the dark ones, but the ones with light and humor, hoping to ease the child's fear. Sometimes the boy listened quietly, sometimes he stared into the fire with distant eyes, as if remembering something painful. He spoke almost nothing, yet Ethan felt his trust growing, slowly, cautiously. By the 4th morning, the storm finally began to settle. Light filtered through the cracks in the frosted windows, painting the cabin with gold. Ethan watched the boy curled up asleep, noticing the way his breathing had steadied, the way his posture no longer screamed fear. But deeper inside the child's eyes, whenever he opened them, there was a sadness far too heavy for someone so young. Ethan knew then, with absolute certainty, that this child hadn't simply wandered off or gotten lost. Something serious, possibly tragic, had separated him from whoever he belonged to. And whatever it was, it had left a shadow that no storm could wash away. Snow still clung to the branches outside as Ethan prepared breakfast, the smell of warm eggs filling the quiet cabin. The storm had softened overnight, leaving a silver blanket across the Arizona cliffs. The child was finally sleeping comfortably, wrapped in blankets near the fire. Ethan allowed himself a small breath of relief, until the peace shattered with the sudden, thunderous pounding against the door. Boom, boom, boom. The sound cut through the cabin like a warning. His pulse spiked. No one ever traveled this deep into the White Mountain wilderness, especially after a deadly storm. He moved toward the door with caution, every instinct sharpened. Years of army training taught him that unexpected knocks rarely carried harmless news. Slowly, he unlatched the lock and pulled the wooden door open. For a moment, he froze, unsure if what he was seeing was real. 3 Apache women stood huddled together in the snow, wrapped in traditional woven shawls. Their faces were worn with exhaustion, eyes red from sleepless nights and endless searching. Snowflakes clung to their dark hair like tiny frozen tears shimmering in the morning light. The eldest woman stepped forward, trembling visibly, her breath unsteady in the cold air. There was grief in her eyes, grief mixed with desperate hope. Her voice cracked as she spoke, each word carrying the weight of fear no mother should ever endure. We've been searching for our lost child, she said softly. The storm separated us, we feared the worst. Ethan's chest tightened. Their pain made everything suddenly clear, the child hadn't been abandoned or wandering. He had been loved, missed, and hunted by desperation through the storm. Before Ethan could respond, the boy appeared behind him, awakened by the voices outside. The moment the women saw him, their expressions shattered into relief and overwhelming emotion. They rushed forward as the child ran toward them, throwing himself into their arms. Their cries echoed through the quiet forest, raw, grateful, and heartbreaking all at once. They held him tightly, as though afraid he might disappear again. Ethan watched silently, feeling the tension in his chest ease. The boy, who had spent 4 days in fear and silence, finally looked safe. One of the younger women turned back to Ethan, her eyes glistening. She stepped closer, lowering her voice as though offering a sacred truth. You didn't just save a child, she whispered. You saved more than one life. You saved our hope. Ethan felt a heaviness shift inside him, something deep, something he hadn't felt in years. After so much loss, after so many moments where he wondered if he still had anything left to give, he realized that this simple act of compassion had become something greater than he ever expected. As the cold wind swept softly across the mountain clearing, Ethan stood in the cabin doorway, watching the reunited family. His heart felt strangely full, warmed by something he couldn't quite name. He had come here for silence, for escape, for a weekend that was supposed to be ordinary. Instead, fate had placed a frightened child on his path and brought strangers to his doorstep who now looked at him with gratitude that went beyond words. Ethan knew in that moment that his life, once quiet and guarded, had shifted forever. Some encounters didn't just come and go, they carved themselves into the soul.